Hello friends, welcome back. Today I'm in Lightroom. Yes, you heard me correct. I'm in Lightroom. Before I jump into that, I want to tell you a little story about how I got here because I think I was wrong about Lightroom. I've changed my opinion. You see, I had Aperture for years, about 5 years, from about 2010 to about 2015. I used Aperture and I loved it, but over time, Apple kind of quit doing things with it, eventually announced that they were going to not make it anymore, not support it, and therefore I needed to abandon it. And in May of 2015, yes, I had to Google my own blog to go find an article I wrote about it, but in May of 2015, I converted over to Lightroom. And I was ecstatic and I was excited and all that sort of stuff. And in fact, I was looking back in the history of my YouTube channel, and the third tutorial video that I put on YouTube was actually a Lightroom tutorial. So I go way back with Lightroom, but in the last few years or so, I've gotten away from it. And, I felt like it was a couple of reasons. One, which is kind of unrelated to tutorials, was that I didn't like the import process and having to stick everything into the database, if you will. I just prefer a file browser. So I kind of didn't like that and was kind of tired of doing that all the time and waiting to for previews to build. But the second thing, and this is really more important, and this is about the editing, was I felt like they were kind of lacking innovation for a while. I felt like they were just kind of stagnant and, they weren't getting pushed by anyone. But as you know, there's a lot of things that are pushing, a lot of companies that are pushing new technology, pushing the envelope, just getting creative with different tools and filters and things like that. And I love those products and I use those products and I make videos about those products and I will continue to do that. But what I've found is that in the last couple of years, of course, the Adobe folks have really, I feel like, woken up. And in regards to Lightroom specifically, I mean, they've added masking, just amazing masking, color grading, advanced noise reduction. There's all kind of things going on here. And a recent poll that I did on my channel, about 15% of the folks that responded to the poll said they'd like to see Lightroom tutorials. And I think that number, frankly, would be higher simply because my audience is probably not very Lightroom heavy, or I should rephrase that, they don't come here for Lightroom because I haven't done a lot in the past. I'm going to change that because it is a great product. I loved it years ago. Like I said, I just felt like they were kind of stagnant. They're definitely not stagnant anymore, and I can do things in Lightroom now that I could only dream of in the past. So let me walk through a quick workflow and show you some of the things I'm loving about Lightroom and how I'm using it. I've got this photo here, and as you can see, I've made some things in the basic. I've got it turned off. But in the basic panel, I start with your general kind of global approach, same way I approach every photo edit, regardless of the product I'm using. I just look at the overall photo, figure out what I want to do, and with a few adjustments there in Develop, as you can see, I went in and made some adjustments to the light, all that sort of stuff. Primarily, it's contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, blacks. I am looking at the histogram and keeping that in mind as I'm making edits here. No temperature and tint. No texture, clarity, dehaze. To me, those are things that I would generally, not every time, but generally do in specific targeted areas, which is masking, and no vibrance or saturation. But what I want to do is show how I'm using these masks, because now the masking, it's world class, really, in Adobe, or I should say in Adobe Lightroom. And so what I want to do is click on the masking icon, and that opens up the masking panel. And the first thing I want to do is get a linear gradient. And I'm just going to come over here and just kind of drag like that, just to make it kind of a wide gradient zone. Pull this down a little bit. And if you notice that's pink, you can click here to change that color. And I actually picked up the pink tip from Blake Rudis of F64 Academy. He does a lot of Photoshop training. Great guy, really nice, really smart, great at Photoshop and great instructor. But he actually does it that way, and I was like, God, that's great. Actually, it's a great idea because you can see it so well. So if yours isn't pink, that's why. I've got the mask in place, and what I want to do is lift that exposure because I want to bring up some visibility into that foreground. So, maybe something about like that. I'm going to also add a little bit of contrast here, which will actually end up kind of darkening some of that back. I'm going to drop the temperature, so I actually want to cool it off. I want to bring up those blues a little bit, but I'm going to increase the tint. And this is what's so nice about masking, is just being able to specifically target areas with these kind of adjustments, which is why I did not do it in the main Develop pane. The other thing I want to do is take this texture slider, which I do like quite a bit, and go left with it. And this is really just about smoothing out that water, which is something I love to do in skies and water. But I'm going to add a little bit of clarity to it, which is going to give a little bit of extra kind of crunch in the reflection of the building's part. So it's smooth, but a little crispy in certain parts. And I'm going to do a minor amount of dehazing. Let me show you the before and after of this mask. There it is before, and there it is now. I feel like we've come a long way, and I'm just getting started. Now, the second mask I'm going to get is going to be for the sky. So you got all these wonderful options here, and you can mix and match and use them together and that sort of thing. But I'm going to start with sky, and you'll see it's picked up that sky. It's done a really good job, but it's slightly off in a couple areas, which is one of the nice things I love about their masking menu is you can just click add or subtract. And in doing so, you can then use these tools to subtract things from the mask. So I'm going to come in with the brush, and I'm in subtract, which means I'm taking it away. I'm just going to come over here and brush away over the areas that I don't want to have included in the mask. In other words, whatever I do to the sky, I don't want it to do to these parts of the building. And so I'm just kind of erasing them just so that this looks the way I want it to look. Okay, so there it is. I've kind of cleaned that up a little bit, and now I've got my mask in place. And this is just for the sky. So I'm just going to drop the exposure a little bit, and once again add a little bit of contrast. Well, a little bit. I'm at like 35 or 40. Remember that I dropped the temperature and increased the tint for the water. I want to do something similar for the sky because you know it's a reflected sky. You want to make sure that they're kind of similar to each other. You don't want the colors to be too off or too different, right? Because it would look strange. I'm going to drop the texture here, but not as much. So I'm going to smooth out that sky a little bit, and same kind of thing, add a little bit of clarity. I love the clarity slider. That was one of the things I loved the most when I first got Lightroom in May of 2015. And a slight bit of dehaze as well, and that's going to add a little bit more drama to that sky by darkening things up. And so let me show you the mask now for the sky and what I've done there. So that's what I look like now, but before it looked like that. So I've darkened it overall, and it more similarly matches what I did in the water, which of course it should. So I think that's looking good, and now I'm really ready to move on to my next mask. So you can just click plus and keep adding another one, and this time I'm going to click objects, and here I'm going to work on the buildings. And so this is a painting where you come in and you can just paint around, and I just come in here and I just paint, and it takes a minute in a situation like this because I have so much that I'm painting, but I'm just trying to grab all the buildings. And once I paint over them, it'll automatically build a mask for me. Okay, so it looks something like that. I'm gonna let go and it's gonna calculate. And there you go. I don't know why, but it keeps missing this area over here. So I'm just gonna click add, and I'm gonna grab the brush, and now I'm just gonna go touch this up just to make sure that I have my mask complete and in place. Okay, so I've brushed that, and now it should capture the rest of that for me. And no, it's not perfect, but it's a whole lot better than it used to be. Let me put it that way. So in this situation, I actually want to increase the exposure a little bit, and you can see it's grabbing those areas that I had to paint in. So I'm going to bring the exposure up maybe just a little bit like that. With temperature and tint, I'm actually going to go a tiny bit warmer, simply because it is a sunset, and of course the sun is hitting those buildings. I just want to be careful because there's already a lot of warmth in those buildings. I don't want to overdo it and make them too warm. I do want to add a little bit of tint to that. I just like my magenta. And then here I'm going to use positive texture simply because I like to bring up that crunch a little bit in the buildings, and of course positive clarity as well. Something about like that overall. And if you look at the before, and there it is on, I think that looks pretty good. I actually might pull that warmth down and that tint down just a little bit, and maybe reduce the clarity just a tiny bit. There it is now before, and there it is now. I think that's looking pretty good, so I'm pretty happy with that. And so the next thing I want to do is actually sort of amplify that warm sunlight that's coming in from the left and hitting those buildings, and I'm going to do that with a radial mask, which is something I like to do when the sky is, or I should say the sun is out of frame, is you can just come in and you can draw a radial mask. And you'll need to mess around with it to get it right in terms of where you want it to be and what you want it to look like. So maybe something about like that. Do a little customization here. I like to have a broad kind of feathering going on and kind of move it into position, and it totally goes off the screen, which is totally fine, of course. But something about like that. The nice thing is you can always just go back and move it. It stays there and it's editable, so I can go back and adjust accordingly if I want to. But what I want to do now is actually increase that exposure so that you get more of that feeling of that sunlight coming in. And in doing so, I'm also going to pop the contrast a little bit because I like what it's doing to some of the clouds there. I'm going to pull the highlights down a little bit. I don't want to overdo that, so maybe a little bit like that. I am going to warm this up. I want it to be warmer and more, yellowish, if you will, simply because it is warm sun coming in from out of frame. And I'm going to go higher on the tint as well, just a little bit, maybe something about like that. And in this case, I'm going to take dehaze down. So if I go to the right, it cuts through that. But if I go to the left, it kind of creates that mystical kind of look, kind of a hazy. I'm creating or adding haze, essentially. And so I like that. And what I think I'm going to do is just move this a little bit more, maybe about like that. Just want to get it roughly in that area. And if you look at the before, you can see that there's a whole lot of blue over there. And so you can tell it's a sunset hitting those buildings, but it's kind of like, where's the sun, Jim, right? So this is kind of saying, hey, the sun is like right there, and I'm hitting those buildings with it. And now that I've done that, I'm done with the masking. But there's one other thing I really want to do, and this is kind of how I typically edit. I'll do the global stuff first, which was basic. I'll do the local stuff second, which is really just all the masking tools. And then I'll often come back and do a little bit more global. And in this case, I'm going to use HSL. And I'm going to open that up. And in hue is totally fine, so I don't need that. In saturation, I'm actually going to bring up the orange just a tiny bit, simply because I have those that warm sunlight hitting them. I'm going to give them a little bit of a pop, but I'm going to bring the saturation of the blue down slightly. It's just getting to be a little bit too intense. So maybe like a negative 25. But the luminance of the blue, I want to bring up a little bit because, again, it's a little bit too dark. So I'm going to bring that up to, maybe about like that. And so this HSL move is taking me from that, where I like the blue and I like the dark, kind of deep, rich look to it. It looks more stormy, and it's like stormy and blue on one side and warm and sunny kind of on the other. But it was a little too much. And so HSL is a great way to do that and just control that color. And that's really the overall edit. Basic edits in basic, I guess. And then a lot of targeted things, water, building, sky, sun, that sort of stuff. And that's the power of this masking capability that's in Lightroom. And then one more little global edit, which was HSL, just to kind of fix the blues. And that really covers my entire photo there. Let me show you what we started with. That was the original photo, dark, nice light hitting the buildings, but very much underexposed and needing some work to really make it pop. And here I was able to, I think, bring it to life, liven up the sky, the foreground, the buildings, and the sunshine coming in from out of frame. I'm loving these masks in Lightroom. If there are certain editing things in Lightroom you'd like to see me cover, let me know. Just leave a comment down below. And if you'd like to see more Lightroom tutorials, give me a thumbs up. I'll be back soon with more stuff about Lightroom, but I'm having fun including it in my workflow. And I'm kind of working through what my workflow is simply because I have so many apps, but I've sort of settled on something. I'll be sharing more of that in the future, but just want to thank you for coming by today. I'll see you in the next video, my friends. You guys take care. I'll see you soon. And until then, adios.